Canada. It's after Canada launched a state-sponsored TV ad campaign opposing U.S. tariffs. The ad featured clips of the late President Ronald Reagan. We go now live to NTD's Washington correspondent, Jack Bradley. Jack, good to see you. What's President Trump saying about the ad?
Good to see you too, Don. Well, the president says that Canada's new campaign ad it's meant to interfere with an upcoming U.S. Supreme Court hearing on his administration's tariffs. The Supreme Court's hearing will decide the fate of Trump's tariffs on November 5th. Trump announced that he's ending trade talks with Canada late last night. And on Truth Social, he wrote this morning. You can see here Canada cheated and got caught. They fraudulently took a big buy ad saying that Ronald Reagan did not like tariffs when he actually loved tariffs for our country and its national security. Canada is trying to illegally influence the United States Supreme Court in one of the most important rulings in the history of our country. Now, this is in response to a $75 million ad campaign sponsored by Ontario that came out earlier this month. It features clips from Ronald Reagan's 1987 address advocating for free trade. Here's a clip of that.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
Now, this ad campaign was criticized by the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation that says that this ad misrepresents Reagan's speech and that his comments were edited and taken out of context and even used without their permission. Now, the White House advisor Kevin Hassett says this morning that Trump ended the negotiations with Canada not just over this one ad, but it was a period of time of frustration with Canada's negotiating team that just seemed to be this ad is what pushed it over the edge. Here's Hassett this morning.
I think the frustration has built up over time. I've been involved in some of these negotiations, and the Canadians have been very difficult to negotiate with. And you look at all the countries around the world that we've made deals with, and the fact that we're now negotiating with Mexico separately reveals that it's not just about one ad, that there's frustration that's built up.
Now, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says that Canada's ready to pick up negotiations with the U.S. when the U.S. is ready, but he said that there's been progress made on the U.S. tariffs with steel and aluminum. Take a look.
Our officials, my colleagues, have been working with their American colleagues on detailed, constructive negotiations, discussions on specific transactions, specific sectors, steel, aluminum, and energy, and a lot of progress has been made. And we stand ready to pick up on that progress and build on that progress when the Americans are ready to have those discussions.
Now, this isn't the first time that the U.S. has ended trade talks with Canada. Back in June, Trump suspended talks after Canada imposed its digital services tax, impacting American companies like Amazon and Netflix. And then Canada canceled the talks, the tax 2 days later after Trump suspended the talks, and then the talks then resumed. But both Trump and Carney right now are heading to Asia, Malaysia, Japan, and then South Korea for the APEC summit. But it's unclear if they'll meet on the sidelines to come to an agreement. But we do know, however, that Trump is set to meet with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping to seek a trade deal. So trade talks are in the works on that summit. Don.
All right, Jack, thank you very much. And just to summarize, an ad featuring former President Ronald Reagan has brought trade talks between the U.S. and Canada to a grinding halt. President Trump said he has canceled negotiations with Canada over the ad released by the Ontario government. In it, Reagan speaks negatively about tariffs, and Trump suggested the ad was an attempt to interfere with the Supreme Court case on the administration's use of tariffs. Joining us is Dana Scott Roth, Diana, sorry. And she is a director at the Heritage Foundation. So Diana, to start off, what is your reactions to the president's decision to end negotiations in response to this ad?
Well, I'm sure that the negotiations are going to continue in due course. What we see with negotiations is that they go up and down, and I'm sure things are going to be headed in the right direction because both countries need each other. If you look at our energy platform, for example, we refine a lot of Canadian crude oil. The Canadians give us a discount on that and then send it back in terms of refined products and gasoline. We have light crude, they have sour heavy crude. They're refined in the United States. So there's a lot of advantage between trade, with trade between the United States and Canada. And I'm sure that these discussions are going to continue after this temporary blip.
But do you feel this, does this put a strain, at least to a certain degree, on the relationship between the U.S. and Canada that, President Trump says we're terminating all trade talks?
Well, he has said that in the past. I think one has to look past what President Trump says, what Prime Minister Carney say. I think we have to look past what they say and look at the end goal. And we also have to look in terms of whether tariffs are fair or not. We have China, which subsidizes its exports of goods in order to undercut Western countries. They are selling a car for about $21,000 in the UK called a Dolphin Surf. Costs more to produce this car than it does to sell it. And we need to focus on China and getting rid of Chinese components in our goods, making sure Chinese electric vehicles do not come into the United States. And I'm sure that President Trump's going to be discussing that when he meets with President Xi.
So Diana, I just want to focus a little bit longer on this relationship between the U.S. and Canada. It seems like you're optimistic that trade negotiations will continue. What needs to happen in order for these negotiations to resume?
Well, in the past, there's generally been some discussion between the leaders, some face-saving announcements, and then these discussions have continued. Look what happened with Switzerland when President Trump cut off negotiations. They were resumed. So the two countries are so closely interlocked. For example, Canada provides hydroelectric power to New England. New England is electricity. The electricity in New England is dependent on Canada. There is too much at stake for them not to make a deal. And I'm sure a deal is going to be made. And let me tell you, with these politicians, you cannot believe always what they say. You have to look past immediate words. You know how George Orwell defined diplomats? Good men sent abroad to lie for their country. There's a lot of words, but you have to look at what actions are going to happen.
Right. And we've seen President Trump, sort of flip-flop on tariffs as well. So we'll just have to wait and see on this what happens. So Diana, can I also get your view on what former President Reagan said about tariffs? What is the context here?
Well, back in the 1980s, most countries we traded with were on an even playing field. And President Reagan was talking about the benefits of free trade. Now, with China using subsidies to promote all its different industries, using slave labor in Xinjiang, building 2 coal-fired power plants a week while it says that is reducing emissions. I mean, China is a serious threat to world trade. And I think if President Reagan were alive today, he would realize that. Trade with China is not fair and it's not free.
Do you think this has the potential, at least, this latest development to perhaps push Canada closer to Beijing in terms of a trading partner?
Well, no one knows what's going to happen in the future, but we also need to look at non-tariff barriers. For example, Europe is putting up a lot of non-tariff regulatory barriers to American goods. It has the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which says that any company with more than $500 million in revenue has to declare its emissions, the emissions of its contractors, the emissions of its contractors' contractors, and has to reorient its operations towards net zero. This is an example of a non-tariff barrier to trade. We need to be focusing on taking down these non-tariff barriers to trade and having more trade on an even framework.
Okay, just one last question here, Diana. So the U.S., sees tariffs as sort of a national security issue, and it is using it to its own advantage. But I would also like to know, maybe you can comment on this, what is the right balance between using tariffs, but at the same time not pushing away allies?
Well, don't forget that there are tariffs on American goods. There are barriers to American chicken and meat and dairy coming into other countries. So to say that it is just the United States that wants tariffs and the other countries have no barriers at all does not make any sense. I mean, there's France that says it doesn't want the import of American cars because of the emissions caused by shipping. At the same time, France is exporting its vehicles by ship to South Africa, where it sells $47 million worth of cars every year. So they're concerned about shipping emissions from Ford, GM, Stellantis exporting to France, but not about their cars, their shipping emissions when they go to South Africa. It makes no sense. So these countries are fighting it out. They're all putting up barriers. President Trump is standing up for the American people, and that's why I'm sure that the dispute with Canada is going to be resolved at some point.
Okay, well, Diana, good to speak with you today. Thank you very much.
Great to speak to you.
The Trump administration is investigating